Our next session is a fireside chat, and joining me is HS2 Managing Director for Phase 2, Tim Smart. And we're going to be talking about planning for a new approach to the railway and the implications for HS2. So welcome, Tim. Nice to have you with us.
Good afternoon, Claire.
So just to set the scene, can you give us an update on where plans for Phase 2A and Phase 2B currently stand?
Yes, quite exciting times on Phase 2. We got the Royal Assent on Phase 2A back in February, so we are in delivery mode now on Phase 2A. And on Phase 2B, we are preparing the environmental statement and all the rest of the plans for lodging a hybrid bill by the first quarter next year, so first quarter 22.
What are the key milestones for the project in the next 12 months?
So if I talk about Phase 2A first, we're currently out with a pre-qualification questionnaire to get an integrated design and delivery partner to work with us over the delivery of the full scope of Phase 2A. And we're looking to try and be out with an invitation to tender by November this year. And then looking further forward, in the first quarter 22, we'll be awarding that contract and then pre-qualifying our main civil works construction. On Phase 2B, as I've said, we're aiming to lodge a hybrid bill for the western leg, which goes from Crewe to Manchester. In other words, where Phase 2A ends and then on to Manchester. And we're looking to lodge that by the first quarter next year, which would give us a Royal Assent date of around 24, 25, depending on how things unfold in both houses of the House of Commons and the House of Lords when we hear petitions. And then we'll be into delivery mode on Phase 2B.
So lots of action to come. What are the main lessons that have been learned from Phase 1 that are being applied to Phase 2, though?
Well, Claire, coming out of the Phase 1 hybrid bill, there was an imperative to hit dates, and therefore we had to go to construction very early. So a lot of the design is being done by our Phase 1 main civil works contractors. And also there was a limited amount of geotechnical investigation available to sort of inform the design. So certainly the first thing on Phase 2A and B will be doing more design before we go to the construction market. So I think that's one lesson, I think, develop the scope further. I also think that the time we've had on Phase 1 has allowed us to tighten up our specifications and focus our requirements, so we get that efficiency in delivery coming through. We've developed our digital modelling, and that will play into what we do on Phase 2, both A and B, and that helps efficiency of delivery because obviously it's a really important platform to launch a lot of our designs and then into construction. And I think we will be looking to try and enable more, I guess, a modular approach to construction and a design for manufacture, which sort of gets a repetition of build. We'll be looking to try and encourage that. And we also have our innovation hub, which has been set up on Phase 1, and there's lots of key innovations that are coming out. I was on site a couple of weeks ago in Euston with the Skanska Costain Strabag team, and they've got a great innovation there, which is sort of a new pump technology to do away with breaking out piles for pile caps, and all these sort of things will be playing into Phase 2A and Phase 2B.
That's great, so you can really plan around some of those innovations. So what about in terms of climate resilience of infrastructure? Are there any differences in the approach to the design and delivery on Phase 2 compared to Phase 1 as a result of the government's commitment to carbon net zero and the need to adapt to climate change that's come through since Phase 1 really was put out to design?
Well, Claire, I guess the first thing I should say, of course, that the HS2 scheme in itself underpins, the transport policy for achieving net zero. I mean, you probably don't need me to tell you, but if you look at, if we just take the simple metric of moving a passenger on, let's say, an equivalent of a kilo of petrol, then a plane is going to do around about 20 kilometres. I mean, cars possibly sort of 30 to 40. Conventional rail 100, high speed rail is up at 150 plus. So in itself, it's a sustainable and greener way to move people, in a regional context. And also, of course, when you compare it to air transport, high speed rail generally, on the sort of 300-400 kilometres, it's just the way to travel. So that's the first thing I'd say. The other thing, also, of course, there's the freeing up capacity of the existing rail network, which allows more freight to be carried on the existing rail. And last week, freight members of the rail delivery group were asking the government for more policies to try and shift the road to rail freight. And I think it's in the order of 7 million lorry movements per year are already eliminated by using freight. So that's another, greener way to sort of move freight around, and that's a key thing for us. So, high-speed rail is a low carbon proposition for transport. In terms of what we've been doing in delivering it, we aim to establish green corridors in our design as far as we can, and HS2 is the first major project to commit to a no net loss in terms of how we deliver biodiversity on the route. And the minister who you heard from this morning has also made a commitment that we will be looking in phase 2B for a net gain position. So certainly, we're looking to improve on what we've done so far. And the other thing I should say, of course, in climate resilience, we take that on board in our design, most obviously flood risk and things like that.
So we've already heard from HS2 Minister Andrew Stevenson about the plans to publish integrated rail plan. Can you tell me what implications the delay to its release has had on phase 2 of HS2 and what uncertainty that's created for you?
Well, the government has remained committed to the phase 2 of High Speed 2, and that was obviously in keeping the momentum going, which is why we are continuing with the hybrid bill and getting the legislation to enable the Crewe to Manchester western leg of what was known as the Y route. So it remains to be seen what comes out from the integrated rail plan when it's published, and we'll be committed to delivering our element of that. The other thing I would say, of course, is it's entirely sensible to deliver big infrastructure projects. And let's face it, HS2 is unprecedented in its scale. So it's entirely sensible to deliver those in phases, as we've done with phase 1, phase 2A, phase 2B. So I think the phased approach is a good way of getting efficiencies, not just in the supply chain, because there's a strain on the amount of resources to deliver big projects, but also it's an efficient use of phasing the budgeting for the public purse. So I actually think that we've done a lot of route planning on some of the other parts of HS2, such as the eastern leg. So I would like to think that the delays will be minimised if there are any.
Okay, that's interesting. So you've done quite a few consultations for phase 2 so far, and some of those have raised calls for improved public transport connectivity with HS2. How will you address those needs and ensure that HS2 meets the government's levelling up agenda by doing that?
Well, again, HS2 in itself is a key plank in the levelling up agenda. It's taking taking HS2 beyond Crewe now into the great cities of the north. So jobs are particularly important. I mean, we talk about the increased connectivity, but of course with that comes jobs, and that's a key part of the levelling up agenda. And I'm pleased to say that last week we had our 650th apprentice start on HS2 in terms of our portfolio. So we're hitting the marks on that. And we have arrangements in place to connect with the main rail network. I mean, clearly our rolling stock has a classic compatible, so we will go off and serve cities that are not directly on the HS2 route. And we also, with phase 2A going into Crewe, Crewe's a great rail hub, and there'll be increased connectivity in that space. And the other thing I think, which is particularly important, is that we will be releasing the release capacity element allows further connectivity and capacity on the existing rail network. So that plays into that piece. And we are also phased in our plans of phase 2B to allow connecting into the Northern Powerhouse route when that comes on stream, whenever that is, and that's going to be obviously informed by the integrated rail plan, which we await. So I think that that there is a lot happening of how we will increase the capacity, increase connectivity by what we do, and the other railway or towns and cities not on the railway will benefit from that.
We've covered the DfT's Restoring Your Railway Fund in detail over the last 12 months in NCE, and recently reported on the restoration of the first rail line in Devon to be delivered through this work. The recent consultation on phase 2 suggested a number of former rail lines could be restored to provide the connectivity that consultees were calling for. What are the main barriers to doing this? How could HS2 support the industry to recreate these transport links?
So I think the first thing of the old railway lines is what is the passenger demand for the usage of when they're restored, because that is really plays into the business case for restoring the line. So that's the starting point. And then I suppose I should consider this in two ways. One is actually connecting to us, and if you're talking about connecting to us, then there's plenty of potential issues in the technical field, which are legion, and I could talk about, track geometry, power, electromagnetic induction, all of these issues. But of course, if these are sort of commuter or regional railways, and they're travelling at, let's just say, a speed of 210 kilometres an hour, 130 miles an hour, and they were to come onto our line, and where we're travelling at 330 average, 330 kilometres an hour, then they would eliminate train paths. One train travelling at, say, at 210 kilometres would take out up to 5 train paths of an HS2 speed. So you've lost capacity immediately. So so you've got technological barriers to entry, you've got capacity barriers to entry. And I suppose the thing then to look at is to say, well, you wouldn't really land a jumbo jet at a small regional airport in Crinkly Bottom. So the best way to look at the connectivity is perhaps an analogous with the airlines, which is you have your hubs, which are served by the jumbo jets, and then you move off from there. So HS2 will be the hub, and then the regional railways connecting as the spokes, if you like. And I think that's the way I would probably prefer to look at it. And I think that's where that restoring the lines would play into the new backbone for Great British Railways, which is HS2.
Yeah, I think that's what a lot of people are calling for, that those hubs, formation of hubs, so they don't have to use their own cars to get to your stations.
Yes,
so
indeed,
talking about passenger demand there, what changes have you had to make in terms of looking at forecasting and following the pandemic and the changing peaks of travel that perhaps people are doing?
Yeah, I think so there's a sensitivity on the business case here, but clearly that doesn't play into what we're building in terms of the infrastructure. And I think the thing is, I mean, look at the Victorians; they probably didn't consider that we'd still be operating their railways when they were building them in the 1800s. And HS2 is is a railway for the future. And despite the effects of COVID on passenger demand, as the Secretary of State said, people would have said, oh, after the certain flu epidemics, the Spanish, and then world wars, passenger demand continues to go. People will still want to travel. So, yes, if there is an impact in the short term, I don't think we're going to see that in the longer term, and certainly not in regional travel. If there is an impact, maybe it might be felt in more commuter routes, potentially. I'm not even sure that would be right, but certainly on the regional travel, we want to use the most sustainable and greener way of moving people, over the longer distances, and that's really where HS2 completely plays into that. We've talked about the carbon agenda, hits the sweet spot there, and it moves people, in the most sustainable way.
So you touched on the formation of Great British Railways just now. What impact, if any, will that have on what you're doing on HS2?
I don't potentially see it will have a great impact on us. I mean, we obviously, as I've talked about, connect with the classic or the national rail network. Those plans will continue to take forward. I look forward to perhaps a better way in which we might better join up the railways. I mean, HS1 is a sort of separate railway from the classic network, although clearly Ashford, trains go off onto the classic railway, so there's precedent there. So I think we can look at how we get better integration with the Great British Railways, but I don't think in terms of our plans going forward it will have a big impact on us.
All right, that's interesting to hear. So you talked really about the started interview about the challenges of the next 2 to 3 years in terms of planning HS2 phase 2. What do you see as the biggest risks to the project in that period?
So I think if I look ahead to clearly, delivering on time and on budget is always a risk when you're dealing with technology, but I think our plans are well set for that. And if I look at phase 2B, we've got to get through Parliament to get the enabling legislation via the hybrid bill, and there's potentially in that time going to be a change of Parliament when we are in the hybrid bill stage. Whether that has any impact or risks remains to be seen. But I think in terms of how we've set out the plans for delivering phase 2, we understand the risks, we understand what we've got to deal with, and I think we're well set for doing that.
Good, that's great to hear. Really good luck with getting that through Parliament. So I think that's just about all we've got time for today. Thank you for joining us and providing an update on phase 2 of HS2, Tim.
Well, thank you for inviting me to for the Fireside chat, Claire. I've really enjoyed it.